One of the strangest stories of the Second World War was Rudolf Hess's mysterious flight from Germany to Scotland in an attempt to try and broker peace between Germany and the British. Rudolf Hess, after all, was Hitler's Deputy Fuhrer and was a man who was loyal to Hitler very early on, when he began to rise to prominence. After the Second World War, he was placed on trial in the Nuremberg Trial, but was not sentenced to death for his crimes. He is considered by some as the last Nazi, and was kept in prison until his death on the 17th of August 1987. However, Rudolf Hess at the time of his death was a frail 93-year-old man, and his death today is still one which is surrounded by much debate. So join us today as we look at the mysterious death of Rudolf Hess, and remember to support our channel. Please make sure to subscribe. Rudolf Hess during the First World War initially enlisted in the 7th Bavarian Field Artillery Regiment and was sent to the front, and he earned an Iron Cross second class. However, after becoming wounded, he transferred to the Imperial Air Corps, where he performed well as a pilot, becoming a lieutenant. After the German defeat of World War I, he was incredibly upset with the Treaty of Versailles and the fact that Germany had to take the blame and pay reparations that would cripple it. Hess settled in Munich and then joined two paramilitary groups which would bring him into contact with Adolf Hitler. He watched Hitler speak in 1920, and from that moment on, Hess became almost obsessed and devoted to Hitler, becoming one of his first followers. Hess gained Hitler's trust, and it was Hess who would scribe Mein Kampf as they were both incarcerated at Landsberg prison. After their release, Hess became ingrained as one of Hitler's closest friends, along with Hermann Goring and Heinrich Himmler. During Nazi Party rallies, it was Hess who would stir up the crowd and introduce Hitler to the masses. When Hitler did seize power in Germany in January 1933, Hess became the Deputy Fuhrer. Hitler and Hess remained close, and if something would have happened to Goring and Hitler, then Hess would have become the Dictator and Fuhrer of Germany. In 1933, Hess also founded the Council of Ethnic Germans, which was a group that would handle the Nazi Party's relationships with ethnic German minorities in different countries. As soon as the Nazis came to power, they began to persecute Jews, and Hess's office was responsible for drafting the Nuremberg Laws of 1935, a set of laws that banned marriage between Jews and non-Jewish Germans. Hess ultimately was motivated by his devotion to Hitler, more so than political gain, and as the Second World War broke out, he continued to act in government, but he began to become more anti-Semitic. He believed the Jews had caused the war, and his speeches became filled with more anti-Semitic rhetoric. Hess became agitated and was known for also being a hypochondriac, but in May 1941 he decided to take action himself. He hoped that although the enemy, Britain would join Germany in a war against the Soviet Union and communism. With this, he decided to fly to Britain from Augsburg on the 10th of May 1941 in a custom Messerschmitt Bf-110 to attempt to negotiate peace. Hitler, when he learned about Hess's mission, was furious, and he ordered propaganda to state how Hess had lost his mind. On board the aircraft, Hess managed to avoid RAF radar, and he flew towards Dungavel House, the home of the pro-peace Duke of Hamilton. Hess parachuted out of his aircraft and then broke his ankle when he hit the ground, but he was taken into custody. When he was interrogated, he explained how he was there to try and broker peace with Britain, and Churchill, when they found out that they had Rudolf Hess captive, couldn't believe it. Rudolf Hess was then kept in a number of different military prisons and hospitals during the Second World War, but as time went on, he became even more agitated, and he even believed that the Germans, who were incredibly angry at the man they deemed to be a traitor, could smuggle food to him that would be poisoned. He was even held at the Tower of London, but whilst in prison he tried to take his own life, jumping from a staircase at Mychet Place. He fell onto the floor below and fractured his femur, and it was assessed that it was likely that Hess could try and take his own life again. He became even more paranoid, but as the Germans surrendered on May 8, 1945, Hess was ordered to appear in front of the Nuremberg Trials. After the Second World War, Rudolf Hess was taken to Nuremberg and was tried along with 23 other defendants, including some of the highest-ranking Nazis, such as Hermann Goring and Joachim von Ribbentrop. Accused of conspiracy to commit crimes, crimes against peace, crimes against humanity and war crimes, Hess faced the death penalty. In prison, Hess claimed that his food was poisoned, and his diary stated how he did not accept the validity of the court. When he arrived at the trial, he was thin, and it was said he was in good health, but he was monitored around the clock to prevent any attempts for him to take his own life, and when he was out of his cell, he was forced to be handcuffed to a guard. He suffered from bouts of amnesia, which was possibly faked so he could avoid the death sentence, but it was clear that Hess had been involved in much of the persecution by signing the Nuremberg laws and other governmental laws. It was argued that Hess could not be found responsible for anything that took place in Germany after his failed peace mission, as he was simply in custody, and for this it was considered that he could not be responsible for the final solution. The court deliberated for around 2 months, and Hess was found guilty of crimes against peace, as in planning and preparing a war of aggression, and conspiracy to commit crimes. He was not found guilty of crimes against humanity and war crimes, and for this was sentenced to life in prison. He was only one of 7 Nazis tried at Nuremberg to face jail time, and would be the final Nazi left in prison from the trial. The 7 incarcerated were taken by aircraft to Spandau prison in Berlin, and the prison was placed under the control of the British, French, American and also the Soviet Union guards. The prison rotated guards each month, and the prison did have a few amenities such as a library. The inmates were not allowed to speak to each other and were given jobs to complete, and were allowed an outdoor walk within the prison grounds for an hour each day. As time went on, the rules became more relaxed, and visitors were allowed for 30 minutes a month. Hess spent the rest of his life at Spandau, except for trips to hospital. He continued to suffer mental health and physical problems during his time in prison, and attempted to take his own life again in 1977. His fellow inmates were released in the 1950s and 60s, and from 1966 to 1987 he remained the sole prisoner of Spandau, which cost a huge amount of money each year. He was allowed more freedom, being allowed to choose his own routine and what he wanted to do, and he was given a television, more reading materials, and he enjoyed gardening. He was suffering from prostate cancer in 1979 and stated he would refuse treatment unless he was released, and that his death would be on the conscience of those nations providing guards. The British Foreign Secretary appealed for his release, but he had never shown any sense of repentance, and he claimed he was innocent. It was considered also dangerous to release Hess, as he would appeal to neo-Nazi groups. He remained anti-Semitic, and wasn't really a harmless old man that he was being portrayed by some. Now, Rudolf Hess died on the 17th of August 1987, and his death is a rather mysterious event that is still today considered strange. He had taken his own life inside a summer house that had been set up in the garden of Spandau prison as a reading room. He had allegedly taken an extension cord from one of the lamps inside the reading room and placed it over a window latch. He had then hanged himself. On his person was a note to his family in which he thanked them for the support they had given him over the years. An inquest was launched and it was confirmed he had taken his own life, and he was initially buried in a secret location to avoid his grave becoming a neo-Nazi shrine. Many questions were raised over the death of Rudolf Hess. For example, his own lawyer questioned how he could have taken his own life. At the age of 93, it was deemed that he was too frail and elderly to have performed the action, and his son backed up this claim, as he believed his father was killed by British MI6. An autopsy did confirm that he had killed himself, but further questions remained. There was a rather bizarre belief that even since his flight to Scotland, that it was actually a body double and not Hess, and subsequently the body double had been staying in Spandau for years. Later, a DNA test on the remains of the Deputy Fuhrer confirmed this to be false. In a BBC broadcast from February 1989, his medical attendant in prison for the last 5 years of his life confirmed suspicions about Hess's death. Abdallah Malawi said that when he entered the summer house, greeted by the scene of Hess's lifeless body, everything was topsy-turvy, yet the lamp cord was in its normal place and plugged into the wall. Also, he confirmed that 2 Americans were there in uniform, arousing suspicion. It was found that Hess was in a poor state of health and that he was suffering from arthritis in his fingers that was so bad that he couldn't even tie his shoelaces, let alone create a noose from a lamp cord. It was also considered that the note left by Hess was a forgery, and that the US soldiers that were actually there were secret British MI6 agents who had allegedly strangled Hess to death and had created the scene with the lamp cord. The debate would continue as a French magazine said an unnamed Allied officer told a journalist that Hess had not taken his own life. It was said also that the summer house, which was the location for Hess's death, was actually burned to the ground 48 hours after the event had taken place, and that much of the evidence, including the cord, was burned, so much of the evidence had gone up in flames. The Hess family were also suspicious, so they hired a doctor to perform a second autopsy, and it was alleged that a different cause of death was found to the doctor hired by the countries who oversaw Spandau. It was said that Hess died from strangulation, not hanging with an electrical cord. However, if this was the case and Hess was in fact killed, why would this have occurred? One argument could have been that keeping Hess on his own, locked up for decades, was incredibly costly, and Spandau itself had around 600 empty cells, 100 members of full-time staff, guards who were provided, and all which came at a huge cost. It was estimated that all of this cost millions each year, and for years the French, American and British wanted to close down the prison and release Hess. The Soviets protested and had their way, but the sheer cost it racked up to keep Hess inside Spandau was monumental. It's believed also that the French, Americans and British could have collaborated with each other against the Soviets, killing Hess despite the Soviets, and therefore shut down Spandau. Very soon after Rudolf Hess's death, the prison was very quickly demolished to prevent it becoming a shrine to neo-Nazis and as a memorial to Rudolf Hess. To ensure that the site was given a new lease of life, a supermarket was created there. So Rudolf Hess's death today is still surrounded in loose ends and intrigue. It's up to you to create your own conclusions as to what happened to Hess inside the summer house in Spandau Prison's garden. It's interesting to consider whether Hess could have been capable of taking his own life, but he was a 93-year-old man who had been locked up for around 4 decades. He today is considered the last Nazi, but during the rise of Adolf Hitler, he was a man incredibly close to the Führer. Hess was Deputy Fuhrer and was seen across Germany as one of Hitler's right-hand men. The power he had across Nazi Germany was rather limited behind Hitler's, but he did sign a number of documents that promoted the persecution of the Jews and helped to perpetuate racial ideas within German society. Rudolf Hess today remains a rather mysterious and bizarre figure. Once again, thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.